Hello, I'm your host, Paul LaRoche, and this is the continuing Hidden Heritage book series. Written by Barbara Marshak, narrated by Paul LaRoche. Join us now for Chapter 4, A Special Gift. Thursday morning, Fritz whipped up a large batch of pancakes and 2 skillets of sausage before the kids even rose from their sleep in the adjoining living room. Paul and Kathy soon joined him in the kitchen, helping Sherelle prepare Thanksgiving dinner for the large gathering expected in a few hours. One by one, the kids started waking up, still rolled up in blankets, and resumed their conversations. Nicole sat up on the couch, yawning, and pulled the blanket around her. Her eyes looked tired, and her long brown hair fell in all directions. "How you doing?" Paul asked, sitting down next to her. Nicole slid over. A soulful expression filled her face. "Oh, Dad." "What?" "I had the strangest dream last night," she said with a hint of excitement. "It was so different than anything else I've ever dreamed." "Really?" he asked with interest. "Yeah, it was so vivid and real." "Tell me," he said. "Well, we were here in this house. Mom came upstairs and said, 'Come on, let's go.' So Mom and I got in the car and started driving down the gravel road out there," she said, pointing. "I saw this large black horse that took up the whole sky, and I could hear it galloping. And then suddenly there was a big moon that took up half the sky, and the horse was running in front of the moon." Nicole spoke very animatedly and precisely, using her hands to describe the unusual scene. "But Mom couldn't see it, and we started arguing. Then I heard these big gusts of wind pushing us toward a plateau straight ahead, and I'm like, 'Mom, don't tell me you can't see it.' All of a sudden there was a big eagle that stretched from east to west, across the whole sky. Mom still couldn't see it, and then whoosh, it dropped behind a mountain." "Oh, this is weird," she said, looking at the empty couch across the room. "What?" Paul asked. "Last night I fell asleep over there," she said, pointing, "and now I'm over here." She looked up at Paul, her brown eyes beaming. "What happened?" Paul grinned and rubbed his hand on her head. "I don't know, sweetheart. It must have been some kind of dream." "It was, Dad," Nicole nodded with exaggeration. "I don't think I'll ever forget it." A few hours later, the LaRoche kitchen counter was filled with turkey, potatoes, and all the trimmings. Several of Sherelle's 12 siblings and their families came over for the Thanksgiving dinner. There were too many people to fit around the table, so everyone filled their plates buffet style and found a place to sit. It seemed they couldn't run out of things to share. Later in the afternoon, some of the boys decided to go pheasant hunting. "Hey, Shane, want to go with us?" Harley asked. "Sure," Shane said. As a kid growing up in Worthington, he'd always dreamed of hunting in the great outdoors. The small town and manicured yards didn't yield much wildlife, but with the young boy's vivid imagination, he took his BB gun and ran around the shrubs and flower beds pretending. This, however, was for real. "Come on, follow us and we'll get you set up." The boys dressed in layers of outerwear and headed outside to the nearby fields and pastures. Shane couldn't believe his eyes. Within an hour, the boys had gotten 13 pheasants. "Over here," John said. "I'll show you how to clean 'em the quick way." Shane watched while John grabbed one of the birds. "Well, you shove your fingers in, right by the thighs," he said, demonstrating. "Give it pressure and rip away the skin." He grabbed a knife and continued, making a few cuts by the wing, and the whole breastplate slips right out. John tossed the breast meat in the cooler and grabbed the next pheasant. "Cool," said Shane, impressed with the instant demonstration. All the years of Shane's hunting in southwest Minnesota had never yielded as great a bounty as on the res. History declared that current-day reservations came into existence through several signed treaties in the 19th century between the tribes of the Great Sioux Nation and the United States. The word Sioux was not part of their vocabulary and was originally derived from the spelling of an Ojibwe word, Nadawe, meaning small like snakes or enemies, and this applied to the Santee in the mid-1600s. Paul and Kathy had recently learned that the Great Sioux Nation was in fact made up of 3 tribes of Siouan-speaking people: the Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota. The 7 subtribes of the Lakota, or the 7 council fires, were the Sikanju and the Kuwachasa Oyate from the Rosebud Reservation and the Lower Brule Reservation. Next came the Hunkpapa, and they're from the Standing Rock Reservation. Then the Oglala from the Pine Ridge Reservation, and 4 various bands that came from the Cheyenne River Reservation. Rosebud was the site name for the federal agency designated for the Sikanju people in 1877, so named because of the abundance of wild rosebuds that grew in the area. Even more interesting was how the Sikanju became known as the Burnt Thighs. According to oral history, the name originated when a sudden prairie fire destroyed a Lakota village. Many children, men, and women on foot some distance from the village were burned to death. People who could get away to a nearby lake saved themselves by jumping in. Many were badly burned about the upper legs from running through the tall, burning prairie grasses, which led to the name Sikanju, which the French later translated as brûlé or burnt. The Kuwachasa Oyate was first designated reservation lands along the Missouri River in 1865. The Lower Brule Sioux tribe was further defined and the boundaries expanded by the Act of March 2, 1889, which identified all the reservations in present-day North and South Dakota. The Lower Brule Sioux Reservation was just one of the 7 Lakota reservations scattered throughout North and South Dakota. Legal documents were then created that established the boundaries and recognized the rights as sovereign governments. The tribal governments maintained jurisdiction within the boundaries of the reservation, operating under a constitution consistent with the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. The construction of the Big Bend and Fort Randall dams on the Missouri River flooded the land along the river, forcing the entire community of Lower Brule to completely relocate to higher ground. The reservation now covers an area of about 404 square miles. Over 90% of the population live in the district known as Lower Brule. The number of enrolled members is about 2,500, with a reservation population of approximately 1,400. That was the official condensed version of the facts. But what would the people say? Would they tell a different story? On Friday, the 2 brothers and their families followed the gravel road all the way to Pierre, about 60 miles, to meet Paul's only living sister. Paul and Kathy followed Fritz's vehicle as the ribbon of gravel curved in and around the endless miles of rolling hills. Cattle grazed in the large pastures along the road that followed the winding route of the Missouri River. "What are those sticks in the water?" Shane asked. In several places along the way, there were numerous tree stumps poking through the top of the water. Fritz said it's from when they flooded the area with the dam. The water covered the big cottonwood trees that were growing along the river's edge. "It's so eerie, like a graveyard," Kathy commented. "In a way, I guess it is," Paul said. "The water took away much of their land, their homes, and even the town, forcing everyone to relocate." After a good hour, they turned onto the highway that led into Pierre. "No wonder Fritz asked if we had plenty of gas," Paul said. "There's nothing between the 2 towns." The capital city is situated in the center of South Dakota, with a mere population of approximately 12,000. Centered along the Missouri River, the small city displayed a clean and neat appearance. Residents of Lower Brule had to travel either to Sioux Falls or Pierre to do the majority of their shopping. Susie Reinhardt, a pretty woman with dark hair and deep brown eyes, welcomed both families into her home. "Hi, Paul," she said, reaching up to give him a warm hug. Her hair was styled in short curls, and her pastel pink sweater accented her cheeks in a rosy glow. Oh, I'm so glad to meet you. I feel the same way, Paul shared, holding her close. I can just feel your family, Susie said. I know it for a fact. Frederick and Jeremiah automatically went up to Susie and gave her a hug. Hi, Auntie, the boys each said. Kathy noted the sincere closeness between family members, as Sherelle helped Kathy and Paul with the rest of the introductions. Susie had 3 children, Mark, Cheryl Lynn, and Fanchon, who was named after the sister who had died so young. The family visited for the full afternoon, and once again the conversation returned to the days and times of the past. Well, when I was growing up, Susie said, Fanchon was 5 years older than me, but we still played together. First we lived in Lower Brule, later we moved to Fort George. Paul and Kathy noticed that the locals referred to Lower Brule as Bruley. We passed Fort George on the way to Pier, Fritz explained to Paul and Kathy. There's not much left, just the old church and the cemetery. Uncle Bill lives in the main house now. The other houses are all gone. Dad ranched in those days, Susie continued. Had to take care of the cattle, you know. Open their water holes in the winter, haul feed. During the summer, Dad's brother's kids came to stay with us, so we had 6 kids living in the house. Dad had a huge garden, so we'd help pull weeds, haul water, and pick potato bugs. She laughed. Whatever needed to be done. Mom had a schedule. Monday was wash day. Tuesday, she baked. Saturday, we went to town, but us kids had to take turns because there was too many to ride in the car. The boys could go one Saturday, and the girls would go the next. And Sunday was always church. Oh, Mom could sew anything. She could look at a dress in the catalog and make her own pattern. This is so interesting, Kathy commented, eager to find out everything about Paul's family. Some years I went to public school, and other times I went to the Indian boarding school. The folks liked to travel in the summer, go visiting. So then I stayed with Unchi and Lala, Grandma Ruth and Grandpa Ben. They lived in a house right across the road. Oh, that was very special, staying with Unchi and Lala. I love those names, Nicole said. Unchi and Lala. I was 13 when Fritz came along, Susie said, glancing at her younger brother. Dad sold the cattle, and a few years later the folks broke up. Mom moved to Oklahoma and got married again. By then, I was already married and living on my own. I never knew about Paul. No one did. Mom was a large woman, tall, maybe 5'11" or so. I guess she was able to hide it. Susie looked directly at Paul. We're so glad you made it home. It's too bad we can't get a nice photo of the 3 siblings, Sherelle said. Say, there's a photographer set up at the King's Inn for holiday photos, Susie said. We could head over there and get one taken. Everyone agreed the occasion should be recorded, so Paul, Fritz, and Susie all trekked to downtown Pier to get a formal photograph. The deep smiles in all 3 evidenced the importance of the moment. Just like the night before, the adults gathered around the kitchen table, talking and sharing highlights of their lives. Hey, Paul, Fritz said. Kathy said you're into music, is that right? Yeah, I am, Paul said, nodding. Our dad was a good singer, Susie said. Really? Paul asked, somewhat surprised. Yes, he had a beautiful tenor voice. Uncle Jiggs told me that Grandma Ruth, our mother's mother, loved to sing and dance, Fritz added. A tiny flame flickered inside Paul, igniting his deeply buried passion. Oh, yes. Unchi had a real gift for music, Susie said, nodding. She always played the piano for us kids. There was music in the house all the time. She played the organ for many, many years at the church at Fort George. She played the old hymns over and over again. Kathy's eyes lit up. This is so neat to find out all these things. I can't tell you how much it means to us. She looked at Paul. Now we know where you inherited your musical gift. Paul plays by ear too, Kathy added. In fact, Grandma Ruth had to play a tune before every meal. You could sit down, but you couldn't eat until she finished the song, Susie laughed. And our Grandpa Ben's mother, Mary Little Elk, had a beautiful voice and loved to sing hymns in Lakota. "Looks like some of that passed along to you, Paul," she said. "The gift of music." It was late in the evening before the LaRoches and Summers took the long drive back to Lower Brule. The night sky was crystal clear, stars dancing brightly in place. A large full moon, enveloped in a whitish glow, inched its way above the horizon. The moonlight reflected brightly against the snow-covered ground, highlighting the quiet beauty of the night. Despite the late hour, the outline of the bluffs and rolling prairie was clearly visible in colorless shades of bluish-gray hues. "Look, there's some deer," Shane said, pointing to 4 whitetails standing in a field, heads cocked on alert. "This is cool out here, Dad. Can we come back and go hunting sometime?" Paul smiled, noting his son's enthusiasm for the wide open spaces. Very few vehicles traversed the rural road at that hour, and a comfortable silence filled the car. Susie's comments lingered in Paul's mind. Grandma Ruth had a real gift for music. Great-Grandma Mary had a lovely singing voice. It was in his blood. He inherited it. Paul's eyes settled on the silhouetted landscape, echoing an eerie glimpse of days gone by. He wondered what the voices of the past would tell him if they could speak. Ancestors, such as Strikes the Ree, a Yankton chief, Red Leggings, Elijah Quilt, Appearing Cloud, Hotanka, and Mary Little Elk. The names themselves spoke of great character. What would they say if they could talk to him now? What would they share about the days of long ago, when they too had seen the moon grace the night in such splendor?